And so, the relentless march of time brings us here, to a vast, silent wilderness, where the only voice is the dry, rhythmic hiss of the wind. Look upon these golden, sweeping dunes of Egypt, shifting under a relentless, blinding sun. The heat is a palpable, heavy weight, carrying the faint mineral scent of ancient, undisturbed dust. But beneath this endless ocean of sand lies a secret, a quiet genesis. Let us descend beneath the burning surface into the cool, silent shadow of a shallow, oval grave. Here, from the Badarian period, nearly 7,000 years ago, a traveler rests in absolute stillness. They lie on their left side, curled in a tender, fetal position, as if sleeping in the very womb of the earth. Beside them, simple earthen jars and remnants of food offerings whisper of a quiet, desperate hope, a belief that this journey did not end with the final, shuddering breath. Long before the first priest's knife was forged, the arid desert sand performed its own silent miracle. It drank the moisture from the flesh, drying it, shielding it from decay. And in doing so, it birthed the very concept of physical immortality. Centuries later, the world would struggle to name these ancient, salt-cured travelers. The Persians, looking upon the dark, glossy remains, called them mum, meaning wax. The Latin tongue softened this to mumia, capturing the lustrous, shell-like preservation of those who refused to return to dust. They were the first to conquer the grave, the waxen sentinels of eternity. And yet, these waxen sentinels of eternity required more than a shallow cradle of shifting sand to safeguard their heavy sleep. As the centuries yielded to the dawn of the early dynastic period, the humble grave evolved, rising from the earth as the mastaba, a monument of mud brick and absolute silence. Step inside, where the air grows cold and still, smelling of dried river clay, aged resins, and the bitter tang of natron. Here, in the deep shadows, the flickering orange glow of torchlight dances across the walls. We glide along these subterranean chambers, our eyes tracing the vibrant, cryptic glyphs of the coffin texts and the Book of the Dead, holy whispers painted in rich ochre and deep charcoal to guide the traveller through the perilous dark. For this tomb was no mere vault for the dead. It was an active portal of cosmic transformation. The ancient Egyptians understood that the human soul was not a singular thread, but a complex, fragile anatomy. At its foundation lay the Khat, the physical vessel itself. It had to remain completely recognizable, preserved with obsessive, delicate care. For upon awakening in the dark of the tomb, the Ka, the vital life force, and the Ba, the unique, soaring personality, would return from the infinite. They had to look upon the quiet face of the Khat and recognize, without doubt, their their eternal home. And yet, this preservation of the clay, this obsessive, delicate care of the Khat, was no mere invention of mortal anxiety. It was an act of supreme cosmic mimicry, a sacred reflection of the world's first and most profound tragedy. Look upon these stylized shadows playing across the temple walls. See the great Osiris, a god of lush emerald skin, representing the fertile soil of the Nile and the very promise of life itself. He ruled in a golden age of peace, alongside his fiercely devoted sister wife, Isis. But where there is light, there is shadow. His brother Set, fueled by a burning, dry-wind jealousy, tore that harmony apart. In a fit of pure malice, Set butchered Osiris, scattering 14 pieces of his sacred form across the length of Egypt, leaving them to rot in the sun-baked dust. Imagine the silent agony of Isis, wandering through the scorching heat, smelling the river silt, searching the reeds. She gathered the fragmented divinity piece by piece, the one final part, consumed by the dark waters of the Nile and the silent fish, was lost forever. Undeterred, she bound him back together, creating the very first mummy, breathing the cold wind of life back into his quiet chest. Osiris could no longer rule the living, but as he descended into the deep, quiet shadow, he rose as the majestic lord of the Underworld. To stand before such ancient mysteries is to feel the quiet pull of our own mortality and our timeless desire to be remembered. If these echoes of the past resonate with you, consider subscribing to join our journey, and share your thoughts below on how we too strive to leave an eternal mark upon the shifting sands of time. For the ancient Egyptians, this myth was not mere folklore. It was their ultimate blueprint. In the binding of linen and the pouring of aromatic resin, they were not just burying a corpse, they were becoming Osiris himself. Every soul, from pharaoh to peasant, claimed a cosmic right to salvation, a divine guarantee that out of darkness and dismemberment, they too would rise, whole, radiant, and eternal. But while the promise of resurrection was a universal light, the earthly path to securing it was paved in the cold, transactional reality of silver and salt. Step off the blinding, sun-drenched streets of the bustling city, where the air hums with the cries of merchants and the suffocating heat bakes the mud-brick walls, and cross the threshold into the dark, cool sanctuary of the embalmer's workshop. Instantly, the temperature plunges, and the senses are overwhelmed. The thick, heavy air carries a pungent symphony of sharp natron, the medicinal sting of cedar oil, and the suffocating sweetness of burning myrrh. Here, in the dim light, we find a grieving family, huddled in desperate negotiation. Before them stands the chief embalmer, gesturing to a row of small, brightly painted wooden models of coffins, miniature promises of eternity. He presents the 3 distinct tiers of salvation, a system of spiritual commerce that the historian Herodotus would later catalogue for the world. The first, the royal path, a meticulous 70-day labor of love,
where the brain is drawn through the nostrils, the viscera extracted, and the hollowed shell packed with pure spices. The second, a compromised grace, where cedar oil is injected to dissolve the inner organs, leaving only a preserved husk of skin and bone. The third, a simple, desperate washing of the intestines in salt, the only option for those with nothing left to give. Yet, this choice is fraught with existential terror. To choose a service cheaper than one's means was not merely a frugality, it was a betrayal. The dead would know. And an insulted, mutilated spirit, denied its proper vessel, would claw its way back from the underworld, returning as a vengeful shadow to haunt the family who had valued gold over the peace of their ancestor's soul. In this dark room, the true cost of eternity is weighed not just in coin, but in the terrifying dread of a lingering, angry ghost.
Yet, to escape the shadow of such a wrathful return, to soothe the terrors of a restless spirit, and secure its safe passage to the stars, the priests of the necropolis must turn to a power far older and more absolute than mere gold. They look northwest, 64 kilometers beyond the bustling streets of Cairo, where the fertile green of the Nile abruptly surrenders to a blinding, hostile expanse, the salt-crusted wastes of Wadi Natrun. From high above, the landscape looks like a scar of pure white bone carved into the burning earth. Here, under an oppressive, silent sky, the ground sparkles with a cruel, mesmerizing brilliance. Microscopic crystals of netri, the divine salt, glisten like shattered glass in the searing heat, waiting to be harvested. Back within the shadowed stillness of the embalming chamber, the air hangs thick with the acrid scent of palm wine and cedar. Upon the cold stone table, the mortal shell of the departed is completely submerged, buried beneath a towering, heavy mountain of this crystalline dust. It is a slow, silent crucifixion by dehydration. This divine substance is a devastating chemical crucible, a natural alliance of sodium bicarbonate, sodium carbonate, sodium sulfate, and sodium chloride. With a quiet, ruthless efficiency, the salt begins its work, aggressively weeping out every ounce of water from the deep tissues, while dissolving the soft fats that once gave the living flesh its warmth and pliability. For 70 days, the salt feeds in the dark, whispering secrets of preservation, until nothing remains but a blackened, hardened husk, dried, purified, and finally ready to face the judgment of eternity. And yet, before that 70-day slumber in the purifying salt can even begin, the earthly vessel must first undergo a chillingly precise, sacred geometry of purification. We step into the quiet, stifling heat of the embalmer's chamber, where the air hangs heavy with the sharp, resinous tang of cedar and the faint, copper metallic scent of blood. Here, the premium transition of the royal dead is treated not as butchery, but as a solemn, clinical art. With exquisite, practiced gentleness, the priest-embalmer leans over the silent form. We see the dull glint of a long, curved iron hook, sliding slowly, carefully up through the nostril. There is a muted, wet friction as the instrument bypasses bone,
liquefying and extracting the brain piece by piece, clearing the skull of what the ancients deemed useless to the spirit. Next, the silence is broken by the slicing of cold flesh. A sharp, black obsidian blade, dark as the abyss, cuts a single, deliberate slit along the left flank. Hand after hand reaches into the warmth of the abdomen, retrieving the fragile organs that once hummed with life. These wet, delicate treasures are washed in a bitter, aromatic river of palm wine, then packed tightly with the golden warmth of pure myrrh and the sweet, woody heat of cassia, exhaling a fragrant cloud that masks the heavy odor of mortality. But look closer at the chest, untouched, undisturbed. There, beneath the quiet ribcage, the heart remains resting in its silent, flesh-bound chamber. It is left behind, the only organ deemed worthy of remaining within the body, preserved as the eternal seat of the soul's intelligence, its deepest passions, and its memories, waiting to be weighed against the feather of truth on the scales of eternity.
Woody heat of cassia, exhaling a fragrant cloud that masks the heavy odor of mortality. But look closer at the chest, untouched, undisturbed. There, beneath the quiet ribcage, the heart remains, resting in its silent, flesh-bound chamber. It is left behind, the only organ deemed worthy of remaining within the body, preserved as the eternal seat of the soul's intelligence, its deepest passions, and its memories, waiting to be weighed against the feather of truth on the scales of eternity. Yet, eternity, like the mortal world, harbored its own hierarchies, and the golden path to resurrection was not granted to all. For those of modest means, the passage to the afterlife took a more clinical, shadow-veiled route. In these chambers, the cold flint knife is spared, and the air is heavy with the sharp, resinous sting of cedar oil. Embalmers inject the pungent fluid deep into the body, plugging it tight to trap the solvent within. For 70 days, the corpse is buried in a dry mound of natron salt, the silence broken only by the low hum of desert flies. When the plug is finally withdrawn, the liquefied viscera stream out in a dark, silent wash, leaving behind only dry skin, hollow bones, and the quiet shape of a life once lived. For the poorest of souls, even this is a luxury. Their preparation is a humble, dusty affair, a simple 70-day bath in common salt, relying purely on the earth's dry embrace to preserve their hope for the fields of peace. It is a poignant reminder that the yearning to survive death belongs to every beating heart. If these deep echoes of our shared past resonate within you, consider subscribing to join our journey as we continue to unearth the mysteries of those who walked before us. But this promise of eternity was not reserved for humanity alone. Nearby, in the flickering amber glow of the oil lamps, the camera reveals shelves lined with smaller, delicate bundles. Cats, dogs, ibises, and baboons, wrapped in the very same meticulous linens, bound with tender, enduring care. Some were beloved companions, destined to wake and play beside their masters in the afterlife, while others were sacred messengers, embalmed to carry the silent prayers of the living directly into the ears of the eternal gods. To prepare these messengers for their ultimate ascent, the physical form must be shielded from the ravages of time, preserved in a cocoon of memory. Hear the quiet, rhythmic tearing of cloth, a soft, tearing whisper that breaks the heavy, cool silence of the embalming chamber. Here, in a sanctum thick with the sharp scent of myrrh and the woody musk of cedar, the wrapping begins. Meticulous hands wind long, precise strips of gum-brushed linen around each individual finger, each limb, anchoring the mortal shell to eternity. Between these sticky, golden-brown layers, the embalmers slide sacred amulets, tucking them away like secrets meant only for the eyes of the gods. Yet, these bandages carry a deeper, heartbreaking intimacy. The priests call this shroud the linen of yesterday, for these very strips were not woven for the tomb. They were once the soft, worn garments of the living, donated from family chests, old tunics and faded shawls that still carry the faint, familiar warmth of hearth fire and domestic life. It is a final, physical embrace from those left behind. But outside the quiet, cool chambers, the grief of the living cannot be contained in silence. The heavy heat of the midday sun beats down on a surging public procession. Here, the kites of Nephthys take flight. These professional female mourners, their bodies coated in grey dust and tear-streaked clay, wail in a piercing, rhythmic crescendo. They throw handfuls of earth over their heads, their cries rising to the heavens to guide the wandering soul through the terrifying dark of the underworld. For in Egypt, grief is not merely felt. It is performed, a loud, guiding beacon of sorrow designed to lead the departed safely to the eternal fields. And when those echoing cries finally fade into the desert wind, and the heavy stone slab is sealed, the cold silence of the tomb takes hold. But this dark, cavernous chamber is far from empty. It is a vessel humming with quiet, latent magic. Here, arranged in the absolute stillness, lies everything a soul could ever desire to maintain the grand illusion of life. In the dim, flickering light, we pass over jars of rich, fermented beer, loaves of baked emmer bread, forever preserved in their oven-crisped state, delicate combs of bone, glittering jewelry of gold and carnelian, deadly copper weapons, and polished board games waiting for a ghostly hand to make the next move. These are not mere symbols of status. They are the physical anchors of comfort waiting to cross the threshold of death. And then, nestled among the riches, we find them, the silent servants. Our eyes linger on the exquisite micro-details of clay, dark basalt stone, and shimmering turquoise-blue faience, the Shapti dolls. These tiny, beautifully carved figures stand in frozen vigilance. For the Egyptians understood that the afterlife, the wondrous field of reeds, was no idle dream. It was a physical paradise, a mirror of the Nile Valley, where the earth was eternally fertile, but where the ancient duty of physical labour still remained. To ensure the departed would not toil under the celestial sun, these magical Shaptis were bound by spell to awaken, taking up the spade and the plough on behalf of their master, so the resurrected soul could rest in undisturbed, eternal luxury. But luxury in the field of reeds is nothing if the resurrected soul cannot truly experience it. To wander through paradise without sight, without breath, or the taste of the sacred bread would be its own quiet purgatory. And so, the final, most vital threshold must be crossed, here, at the sun-drenched entrance of the tomb. Outside, the desert wind carries the sharp, medicinal tang of natron and the sweet warmth of frankincense. Standing before the shimmering golden mask of the deceased is a figure of myth made flesh, a priest wearing the stark, midnight black jackal mask of Anubis, or perhaps the eldest son himself, embodying Horus to redeem his father's mortality. In his grip, he raises a ceremonial copper adze, its cold metal gleaming under the harsh golden light. In breathless, slow motion, the adze descends, gently touching the eyes of the gilded mask, so the dead may gaze upon the stars. It kisses the nostrils, letting the breath of life flow once more. It touches the ears to hear the celestial choir, and finally, the mouth, unlocking the tongue to speak the sacred spells, to eat and to claim eternity. If these deep echoes of the past, preserved through millennia of dust and devotion, resonate with your own journey through time, consider subscribing to join us as we continue to unearth the spirits of those who walked before us. With the senses now fully restored, the mortal world recedes. The heavy stone slab of the tomb is ground into place, sealing out the light, leaving the mummy in absolute, majestic silence. As we pull back across the centuries, leaving the echoes of the pharaohs behind, and return to the hum of our modern